Brian Hall here, Later Code Camp 2013. We have with us Rob Eisenberg, creator of Caliburn, Caliburn.micro, and now a new JavaScript framework called
Durandal.
Durandal, that's how you say it. We'll say it wrong. So tell us a little bit about Durandal.
So Durandal is a framework, JavaScript framework, as you said, for building single-page applications. So an application that essentially lives entirely within one HTML page, more or less.
Okay.
No standard browser posts or page changes or anything like that. And these are becoming more and more popular. People are probably experiencing these a lot now with things like Gmail and Office and Outlook Online, and
right.
Just more and more rich interactivity is happening within one page without going from page to page to page to page. So,
right. And from my understanding, Durandal fills a specific niche in the SPA lifecycle, if you will. So if you've got Backbone or Knockout or Ember or Angular doing some of the model binding, and then you have something like Breeze.js doing some of the data stuff.
mm-hmm.
Where does Durandal fit in?
So Durandal, among those things that you listed, is probably most similar to something like Angular or Ember.
Okay.
It focuses primarily on the architecture of your UI itself. It doesn't specify anything specific for doing your models, for example.
Okay.
But it does focus a lot on modularization and composition of complex screens. So it's really around how do you get a clean architecture for your user interface. And then you could go and use something like Breeze, for example, for your model and data layer.
Okay.
And Durandal also is a little bit different from things like Ember and Angular in that it doesn't build everything from scratch.
Right.
What it does instead is it says there's some really strong, mature libraries out there that a lot of people are using already. Let's take a few of those as a starting point. Mm-hmm. Let's stitch them together in a very particular and strategic way, right, and see if we can't come up with a really nice experience for building single-page apps.
Right.
So jQuery, for example, Knockout, which we use for data binding, and then Require.js, which we use for the modularization. And we just put those together very carefully, and then we build a kind of a thin layer on top of that, and some code around that combination of things.
Okay.
That's basically what Durandal is.
So something I was reading recently or heard about, it was with the Require.js, it's an AMD, asynchronous module definition for JavaScript, and that's sort of like dependency injection, but in its JavaScripty way.
Right.
So what are you doing to help abstract that, I guess, is the best way to say it.
So, well, AMD is kind of interesting because, and generally the way that modules work with AMD and with common.js modules, like if you're doing Node and what's coming in the future of JavaScript. And one of the reasons it's interesting is it's kind of a blend between what we would do in like C# or VB language with your using or your import statements.
Yeah.
But it also, because of the nature of JavaScript itself, it also is sort of like a dependency injection container. So it's kind of like halfway between, because you can export things. You can export an object, which essentially is sort of like registering a singleton in a container.
Right.
Or you can export a function, which is sort of like registering a per request or per instance kind of a life cycle for an object in a container. So you can get a lot of the really neat advantages of IOC and kind of combine that with what you're used to from just
modular building.
And that all comes together, and that's all part of the way that spec works, and Require.js is an implementation of that. So what we do is two things, basically, is that we sort of set some patterns around how you organize your code.
Right.
And so people can basically see, like, okay, basically I'm going to export objects if I want like singleton modules. You might think of, if you're building a complex app, you might think of the shell of your app and its behavior as being a singleton. There's only one of those.
Right.
But you might have an edit screen. Maybe you've got multiple of them can be open at a time. So you might export that as a function that creates an instance. So we kind of those are part of what AMD allows, but Durandal understands those common patterns and then can sort of automate a little bit of connecting things together as a result.
Yeah, and then from my experience with the Require.js stuff, it's difficult to conceive, and I think like part of the advantage of some of the things that like say TypeScript is bringing, they're bringing the modularity aspect of it. For me, that's the most exciting part personally, but so that you can actually structure your JavaScript to mirror what a C# file contains typically one or just a couple of classes related to one specific instance, but JavaScript typically now it's just.
And with Durandal, what we do is we basically say, if you're going to build a Durandal app, that's the way you do it. One file per module, and it's either going to be an object or a constructor function, basically.
Okay.
And the system understands all that. The other thing we do is, typically when you build an app like this, you end up with then a lot more files. Okay. So then it becomes an issue of how are we going to deploy this? Because if we have many files, then something like Require is going to do a network request for every single one of those. And maybe that's okay, it depends on your app, but a lot of times what you want to do is get it down to bundling up the whole thing. And Require has a tool for that called R.js. And that's where a lot of real pain comes in, because it's a little bit tedious to, not only a little bit tedious to configure, but it takes a little while to figure out how to get it configured right. So one of the things that I did with Durandal specifically for .NET developers is I wrote a little optimizer in C# that essentially understands how you would structure a typical Durandal project and automatically generates the configuration file for R.js. And then runs R.js and spits out the final single file build for you.
Nice.
So you don't have to do anything but double click that or and then your entire app, and that means HTML and JavaScript are actually in that file.
Wow.
So that's really neat, and then it becomes something that deploys a lot more similarly to what people might have been familiar with in like Silverlight or Flash. So it's sort of like having that, it's a package.
Yeah.
Now you can split it up into multiple packages. You'll have to do the configuration yourself, but for the most common use case, I wrote this optimizer that's just, you just run it and it does it for you, and that's it.
Now, is that like a console app that's inside, or is it
It's a console app. It deploys as part of it's on our NuGet packages and our starter kits and everything. So it's just optimizer exe. You just run it and it spits it out basically.
And we can find on NuGet, Durandal is out there. Just do a search for it.
Yep. There's a few different packages. There's kind of the base package that just has only the modules. So Durandal itself is written just as a set of AMD modules. So I try and be as self-consistent as possible.
Right.
So you don't actually, Durandal is written the same way that you would write your own app in a sense.
Right. Okay.
So the base package has those core modules, and then we have a couple other packages. We have a router package, which integrates with Sammy.js to basically do your URL hash-based routing.
Yeah. So if you head back, you don't leave the whole page. You just leave.
Does the history stuff, and what you can do is very much like if you were doing an MVC app, you sort of map URL patterns to modules.
Okay.
That's a little bit different than what other things do, because most of the other frameworks wrap them into functions. But Durandal is all about like things like MVVM, where you are modeling your UI. Right. So with this, you map a URL pattern to a module, and of course Durandal knows that it has some intelligence about it. When that route matches, we find that module. We understand whether it's a function or an object module, so we get the right instance, and then we can locate a view by convention. So if it's customer list JS, then we'll find customer list HTML, data bind them together, and then inject them into the page at the right spot.
No kidding.
So
that's impressive.
So it makes it real simple for building some standard things, and
it makes building complex JavaScript applications much more.
And that's the idea. When I buy the when Sposson started to get really popular. I was starting to kind of, not really popular, I guess they're not super popular yet, but when that buzz started to come, it was kind of on the tail end of a lot of work that I was doing in the XAML space. Right. And I had been looking around and was not really satisfied with the developer experience around building one. Because I tend to think about that because when I go on my job and work 8 hours a day, if I have a good tool to do it with, then it helps me enjoy that 8 hours a lot more. So I have a certain aesthetic in my head, and some of that's expressed in things like Calibre and Calibre Micro that I'd spent a lot of time on other platforms building that I wanted to have when I went to the JavaScript world. I didn't want to give up some of the niceties of those other platforms. So some of that kind of got infused, and some of those conventions and binding and how we construct things comes out of.
So it should be familiar to anybody coming from the Silverlight world.
Very familiar.
Yeah, and we combine that with Backbone and Breeze now.
Yeah, you could use Breeze with it. You could grab like one of the strong features of Backbone is its models.
Yeah.
Models and not just collections, I think. I'm trying to remember all the different frameworks terminology. You could put that together with Durandal if you like that piece.
Or Knockout. That's actually the one I meant to say. Knockout. So.
And we use Knockout internally. It's kind of one of our 3 pillars: Require, Knockout, and jQuery.
Okay.
But you can integrate all kinds of other things with it. We've got people using Breeze with it. We've got people using Kendo UI with it. We've got people using, actually we've got a guy now that's stripped out Require because he had a bunch of code that was running on top of Dojo, which has an AMD loader. It's a little bit different, so we did the work to make sure our stuff could work with that. So he's using Dojo with it, and so...
very pluggable then.
Yeah, it's pretty pluggable, and we didn't want to... People already have libraries they're using, and the JavaScript community actually tends to be pretty opinionated. Like, I'm a jQuery guy, or I'm a MooTools guy, or whatever. So it's like people they don't want to have to give up something they've been using for years. So we've done some work around that, and there's more work to be done in the future. But
wow, that sounds really good. So, how can people find you, give you money?
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be good.
So Durandal is open source.
Okay.
So there's nothing, you don't need to pay for it or anything like that. Best place to start is Durandal.js, Durandal, js.com. You can also find it on GitHub. But on Durandal.js, you'll see, your basic marketing spiel, but you also, there's lots of docs there now. There's a getting started page, so you can kind of see like, okay, here's how I get set up in the .NET world, here's how I get set up in the Node world, because we've got some other stuff besides the NuGets. We've got equivalents in other spaces. And then you can kind of go through what we have as our starter kit and see how that's put together very basically, and then how you add like a new page to that navigation structure. And then you can go to the docs, and there's tons and tons information there, and I'm continuing to expand that, based on what the community says. I'm having a hard time doing this, or how do we do this? So that's always constantly
and you take pull requests?
Expanding. Take pull requests took to yesterday, actually, so the community is really becoming quite active. So there's a Google group. I take pull requests, and then also I have commercial support options too. So if you're working for a company that likes the safety net of having that, or you're a developer working on a new project and this looks like a good fit for you, but you want to know that if you get in a jam, so there's a few different plans as far as that, depending on number of developers covered, and they're subscription based, so you can buy a year or you can just go monthly or whatever. So there's some options there, but there's no there's no obligation. It's MIT licensed, which is extremely permissive, and yeah, so there's some videos out there now, and John Papa just a couple of days ago released his new Pluralsight Spa course, which uses Durandal.
Nice.
So there's some really good training out there as well.
Great. Yeah.
And then I'm putting together, in the next couple months, I'm putting together some boot camp type training.
Okay.
So I'll probably be going around later this year, start going to some major cities and doing some 3 to 5 day intensive boot camps that are Durandal, but also in general UI architecture in the browser. Okay. So, well, great. But Durandal will be the tool for that, of course.
Yeah, no, definitely. You have to. That's what you're doing it for, right?
Yeah. So.
Okay. Well, we're going to have links in the show notes or the YouTube notes, and for all the things that you just mentioned. And I want to thank Rob for coming on and
thanks for having me.
Speaking at Orlando Code Camp.
My pleasure.
Thanks.